Um, we have a presentation by Dr. Joe Ikley. So he's, as you probably are all familiar with Dr. Joe Ikley now, he is the Extension Weed Specialist from NDSU. And he's going to talk to us today about considerations for the Xtend and Enlist soybean systems. And so you're able to share your screen here, Joe, and get going as soon as you're ready.
All right, as long as you can see the slides here, I guess I'm good to go.
We can see them and we can see you. Thanks.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you, everyone, and hopefully this will go over pretty smoothly here. So what I'm basically going to talk about today is some things to consider in the 2021 season for the Xtend and Enlist soybean system. And what I'm mainly going to focus on today is some of the things to consider as far as herbicide efficacy. I do want to touch a little bit on label updates for the Xtend system, since that's kind of new going into this year, but really want to focus more so on some of the things and considerations for some of these tank mixes we might apply within these systems. Before I get to that, though, the number one question of the extension season for me so far has been, where the heck is the weed guide and how do I get it? So they are on campus now over at AgCom. If you call the distribution center, their phone number there is on the screen. You can certainly get copies that way. If you're near a campus, just stop by Morrill Hall, go down to the basement, and they're available there. If you prefer online, I have a QR code here on the screen that if you scan that, it brings you to the electronic version, or you can also just Google NDSU weed guide, and that's one of the first hits. And then they are going out to county offices across the state. So if you're in North Dakota, they should be showing up at county offices soon, and you can pick up copies there. Okay, so as far as the actual presentation for today, here's 4 different things that I want to touch on. As I mentioned, some label updates for Xtend. Also going to talk about antagonism of these products when it comes to grass control in these systems. Some different post-emergence options, and I'm going to show you some pictures from my trials this past year on water hemp. But just know that when I talk about that, these same systems all work pretty well on other broadleaf weeds we're trying to control. And then finish with some of these mixing compatibility issues that we know can occur in the Enlist system. So first, I just want to show this table here. Myself, Dr. Peters, NDSU, and some of our colleagues at University of Minnesota have put together a guide, PS 1945. It's the different herbicide resistant traits that we have in all the different crops we plant in both North Dakota and Minnesota. I'm just bringing up the soybean guide here, the soybean table out of that quick fact sheet, just really to highlight that now we do have the Roundup Ready 2 Yield Xtend Flex available for us to use this upcoming year. So it's basically the Xtend soybean system, plus now we can use glufosinate or Liberty. So for most of the time that I'll be talking and sharing some data, it's going to be either on Xtend Flex soybean or on the Enlist E3 soybean. Okay, as far as label updates, the main updates here for the dicamba products, so far Ingenia, XtendiMax, and Tavium have been relabeled for a 5-year registration. Fexapan should be following suit, but I have not heard it's confirmed as re-registered yet, but it should be available if you prefer to use Fexapan. A couple of changes. So all the old restrictions for using these products are still in place on the label, but there are additional restrictions for use of these products going into the 2021 season. One of the first ones is we can only use these on Roundup Ready Xtend or Xtend Flex soybeans. So in the past, we could use something like Ingenia on corn or in a fallow ground situation. It's only for use on Xtend soybeans this upcoming year. There's a national cutoff date of June 30th. And this is adopted regionally as well. So North Dakota, Minnesota, and South Dakota will all be June 30th this upcoming year. Some additional restrictions. Ingenia, it's just the cutoff date. If you use XtendiMax, it's also listed that no applications can be made after R1 or initial flower. And then Tavium, no applications can be made after the V4 growth stage or 4 trifoliates. And that's really driven by the S-metolachlor component of Tavium, which again is a premix of dicamba plus S-metolachlor or dual magnum. The other big one is adjuvant requirements. So now what's new this upcoming year is we have additional adjuvants that need to be added into every application. So for Ingenia, the label calls it a pH buffering adjuvant. XtendiMax and Tavium is called a volatility reducing agent, or a VRA. So the websites for these products are just now starting to come online and list some of these products. The XtendiMax label, as of this morning, I saw 13 different labeled products that count as a volatility reducing agent. And again, that's something that needs to go into every application, just another product that's going to help reduce volatility and off-target movement of these products that way. The other change from the previous label to this one is there's now a 240-foot downwind buffer to sensitive areas. It used to be 110 feet. Now it's 110 feet if you have a hooded sprayer. So if you don't have a hooded sprayer, it's 240-foot downwind buffer to sensitive areas such as trees, wildlife habitats, things like that qualify as a sensitive area. And again, the other thing I didn't mention, we do have to go through training again. So these sensitive areas do get covered in the training for these products. One thing I'm going to touch on briefly here is with the buffers, there are stricter rules in counties with endangered species. And that's been something I've gotten a lot of phone calls and questions on over the last week or so. So I apologize for the quality of this map. I tried to find a map that encompassed North Dakota, Minnesota, and South Dakota. So these are, and this is new for North Dakota and South Dakota. It's slightly adjusted from last year for those folks who applied dicamba in Minnesota. And so basically, if the county is in red, these are now counties that on the new label and with new guidance from the EPA have some endangered species in them that we have concern about, or the EPA is concerned about, with off-target movement of dicamba affecting endangered species within these counties. One question I've gotten is, what is the endangered species? And the answer today is officially, I do not know. So we're still trying to figure that out. There's a couple of theories based on all the endangered species that are listed, but officially we have not found the answer. And I know there's folks within the Department of Ag talking to EPA this week to try and get some additional answers to this. So the reason I show this is it's actually quite a big change on the label of how these counties are managed, how we manage dicamba applications in these counties in 2021. So here at NDSU, we put together a quick chart showing some differences. The top two rows here are the species with non-endangered, or the counties without any endangered species listed in them. And again, just this 240-foot downwind buffer. If you're in one of those counties highlighted in red, there's some additional buffer requirements. And so what this basically means is 57-foot omnidirectional buffer. So all around the field has to have at least a 57-foot buffer to a sensitive area. And then downwind is 310 feet, 240 feet if you have a hood. The biggest change that's somewhat buried in the label language is the only crop that we can count as part of the buffer now, and just in these counties, is the DT soybeans. So what this means, if you're in one of these counties, is if you have your Xtend soybeans planted right next to corn or wheat field, those actually no longer count in these counties as part of our buffer requirements. So that's kind of a big deal for trying to figure out how our acreage can get sprayed. Again, we're seeking further clarification moving forward, but all the phone calls and questions I've asked, this is confirmed as the rules going into 2021 in one of these counties. So again, this is covered in the training. I just completed Ingenia training earlier this morning, and this does cover it in more detail there. I just wanted to highlight that one change since we've been getting questions. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to talk about antagonism on grass control in the Xtend and Enlist systems. So first, I want to start by showing some older data from Dr. Zollinger, who of course predated me here at NDSU. Back in the launch year of Xtend Soybean, put together some research and then some quick results here. And so in this case, he was mixing clethodim with dicamba products and different adjuvants. So clethodim plus a surfactant, crop oil concentrate, and then HSMOC. And just going to show over here on his average control of different grass species. When we just have dicamba and the surfactant, we were getting 78% control of these grass species across a number of different locations. Once we added dicamba into that tank mix, we lost control. Now what Dr. Zollinger found is adding AMS to this system gets us back up to equivalent control without dicamba. But dipotassium phosphate, which is an AMS replacement that can be used in the dicamba systems, we're not able to recover the same level of grass control by using that adjuvant instead. And this basically pans out for the other adjuvants tested here. Now, the thing to consider here, of course, we cannot use AMS when we tank mix with dicamba in these systems. So really highlighting the fact that if we're using a clethodim, which is Select Max or other products, plus dicamba, we're going to have some antagonism on grass species and on volunteer corn. Digging into that a little bit deeper, I'm going to share some data here from Kirk Howlett at NDSU. Here is Roundup Ready corn control and Xtend soybean. And how Dr. Howlett conducted this trial is we have 3 different graminicides. So Assure 2, Fusilade, and then Select. The products applied alone are the green hashed bar on the left. And then red bar is the low rate of that product, which is on the bottom part of the screen. Yellow bar is the medium rate of that product he applied. And then the light green bar by itself is the high rate of that product. So the Xtend soybean systems, what he basically found is once you add dicamba to these different graminicides, we do lose control on volunteer corn. And then it really takes going to the highest rate listed there on the bottom part of the screen to get equivalent or back up close to the same control as applying the product alone. So that's the Xtend system. This does show itself a little bit more in the Enlist system. So here's those same tank mixes of the same graminicides at the same rates. And now we're just replacing dicamba with Enlist 1. And so the one that really sticks out here is Assure 2. And at our lower and mid rate, we lose a lot of control in volunteer corn, and no one's going to be satisfied with that level of volunteer corn control. And it really takes at the highest rate to get anywhere close, but we're still losing control compared to applying Assure 2 without Enlist 1 by itself. And then same thing with Fusilade and Select, just not as dramatic as the Assure 2 tank mix. Some pictures showing how this looks in the field. I'm going to show the 3 products in the next couple of slides here. So here's Assure 2. This top picture is Assure by itself. And the bottom left is that low rate of Assure 2 tank mixed with Enlist 1. The mid rate of Assure 2 tank mixed with Enlist 1. And then that high rate of Assure 2 tank mixed with Enlist 1 again. And so what we're seeing here is that to get anywhere close to Assure 2 by itself, we need to have that highest rate of Assure 2 when we tank mix it with 2,4-D. Those lower rates, we get such antagonism, it really doesn't look like we touched the corn at all. Fusilade, similar story, need to get that high rate to get close to the same level of control. And again, the same thing with Select. So just showing that in picture form, what I showed on the graph there. The other thing I was going to mention, I dropped the slide here at the end just to save some time, but we're seeing some similar antagonism issues with glyphosate and either dicamba or 2,4-D, not nearly as severe as the group 1 herbicides and dicamba or 2,4-D. And where this has really popped up across the country is in the Mid-South, and especially in Tennessee. My colleague down there is having some issues with jungle rice and barnyard grass, which are 2 very related species. And these tank mixes of glyphosate plus dicamba or glyphosate plus 2,4-D, they are seeing a loss of control on these barnyard grass species. We have not had many reports of that in this part of the country, but as we put these tank mixes on more acres, if I look at a grass that I have concerns with of antagonism between dicamba or 2,4-D and glyphosate, it's going to be the barnyard grass species. So again, a problem in the Mid-South, but we haven't heard many concerns up this way, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening anywhere and may not happen in 2021. Okay, so switching gears here for broadleaf weed control. I just want to show a couple post-emergence programs. I do want to highlight the fact that we do always want to start with a pre-emergence program, especially if we're going after tough weeds like water hemp. But just going to quickly show in picture form some of the things that we saw in my research this past year here just outside of campus. So the first several slides here are just different programs we can try in the Enlist system. I do want to point out whenever we have Liberty by itself, we used a turbo T-jet nozzle. Anytime we had Enlist 1, we did use an approved AIXR nozzle. So when we talk about some of these tank mixes, when we use the approved Enlist 1 nozzle, it's not optimized for Liberty because we have bigger droplets and not as good coverage. But I'll just show and point out as we go along here that even though we have nozzles that are not optimized for Liberty, we can still get some pretty good control out of these tank mixes, even though we're having these larger droplets from Enlist 1. So a side-by-side here, one application made June 15th of Liberty plus Enlist 1, and compare that to our Roundup plus Roundup check, if you will, to show that we have glyphosate-resistant water hemp. Comparing, here's that same Liberty plus Enlist 1 on the right, and compare that to Liberty applied by itself, same date, these treatments are right next to each other. So one of the things that we've seen across a number of broadleaf species that we can do in the Enlist system is that Liberty plus Enlist 1 is a pretty good tank mix all by itself, as far as, so the Liberty plus Enlist 1 is a pretty good tank mix to apply together, pretty synergistic on these broadleaf weeds. And the thing I just forgot to mention is that in all these treatments here within the Enlist system, the only adjuvant that we are using is AMS, in this case at 3 pound per acre rate. Okay, well, something else I want to point out, left side of the screen here, Liberty by itself. Right side of the screen is Liberty followed by Liberty. So I've received several commercial complaints about failure to control water hemp with Liberty. Of course, I saw that within my own plots here as evidence on the left. But in our research plots, when we have a planned sequential application 14 days after the first application of Liberty, we were able to clean up most, if not all, of the water hemp plants that escaped that first application. A lot of the phone calls I've been getting is really when that second application of Liberty is made 3 or 4 weeks after that first one. And so we'll be looking a little further into this, into the date of the sequential application of Liberty and how that looks on water hemp control this upcoming year. But at least when we have a planned sequential application 2 weeks after the first one, we were able to do a good job cleaning up those escaped water hemp plants. If you really want to see what the system can do, and then of course spend some more money to have more tank mixes, here's that Liberty plus Enlist 1 tank mix applied once and then followed again 14 days later. So this was a June 15 followed by a June 30 application. These pictures taken late July. Pretty good job there cleaning up most, if not all, of the water hemp. All 3 products that we can apply together, so Liberty plus Roundup plus Enlist 1 sequentially, again, pretty similar results. So we do have some pretty good tank mix options for water hemp. And as I mentioned, these apply as well to things like common ragweed and horseweed as well. So some different options we have available sequentially or tank mixed for control of these weeds in the Enlist system. Really quickly, I want to show one slide with some research this past year in the Xtend Flex soybean system. So again, I mentioned that the Xtend Flex, we have tolerance to Liberty, glyphosate, and dicamba. The one thing with the Xtend Flex system is, at least in 2021, we will be prohibited from tank mixing Liberty and dicamba together. Once you add Liberty to a tank mix with dicamba, it does increase the volatility of dicamba. So I know there's some different adjuvant research being done to help reduce that volatility, but as far as going into 2021, Liberty plus dicamba is a prohibited tank mix in the Xtend Flex soybean system. So what that relegates us to with the Xtend Flex, if we can't tank mix all 3 products together, we have to look at some sequential programs. And what I just want to point out here, if I talk to any of my colleagues in the Southern US or the I states, they've seen better control when you have dicamba first, followed by Liberty on weeds like water hemp. This past year, we actually saw better control with Liberty followed by dicamba up here. And so there's a couple things I can attribute this to. One thing we do want to do is repeat this, of course, again, going into 2021 and try and narrow down what's really going on here. But we had a pretty aggressive water hemp population here. And I really attribute this to having Liberty plus Roundup applied through a turbo T-jet nozzle. So we had better coverage in that first application than coming back with our TTI nozzles in the second application. This is probably related to coverage on a very aggressive water hemp population, but again, something we need to really dig into a little bit further next year. So again, further south, this program on the right has worked better and more consistently. The research to date up here, we've seen a little bit better control out of a program on the left. Okay, the last thing I want to quickly go through is, and I've shared this a couple of times the past 2 years, but tank mix compatibility issues with Enlist 1 and glyphosate. So if you look at the approved list of glyphosate products we can tank mix with Enlist 1 in the Enlist system, there's a number of different products. And I want to point out there's a number of different types of glyphosate salts that these products are made up of that are approved for use. And the reason I bring this up is it's these potassium salts of glyphosate that we've seen some antagonistic mixing compatibility issues. So to show this in a general tank jar test, what we've laid out here is a DMA, an IPA, and a potassium salt. We have not seen this compatibility issues with DMA or IPAs in all of my testing, but once we have a potassium salt, we will get these products falling out of solution. And here's a close-up showing that potassium salt plus Enlist 1 tank mixed together without allowing adequate time for either one to mix into solution. And we have these crystals falling out of solution. Just another close-up there. This is 1 hour after mixing, and again, we did not see any settling out of the products of the DMA or the IPA salt. That potassium salt, we create quite a lot of white residues that we can leave behind in the system. AMS, we've seen some issues commercially, but if you add AMS to the tank and allow plenty of time, 5 to 10 minutes for it to fully dissolve in water, we have not seen any issues then when you add glyphosate plus Enlist 1 to the tank. But keep in mind, if you try to throw everything into that tank pretty quickly, one after another, we can get AMS plus Enlist 1 by itself, resulting in some salting out and leaving some white residues behind. And a couple close-ups looking at different formulations of AMS. So Corteva is, of course, aware of this and has put together a pretty nice fact sheet of mixing order. This is available online, so it won't last too long, so I'm about out of time here. But 2 slides to finish up on with this thought is that we've seen some of this commercially as well with Liberty plus Enlist 1. So in the lab, we were not able to get as much product falling out of solution, but we can get some residues left behind. This picture on the right shows a ring of this white residue when we quickly tank mix Liberty plus Enlist 1 together. And again, just if we follow those instructions that Corteva laid out, so again, if you Google the Enlist mixing order, that's one of the first hits that you'll find. But in this case, we put AMS into the tank, allowed it to mix for 5 minutes fully into solution, and then we added the potassium salt of glyphosate, allowed that to fully mix for 3 to 5 minutes, and then the Enlist 1 choline. And then once we followed those steps with plenty of mixing time in between, we did not have this salting out occur. And even if we let that tank sit there for 4 days, we did not have any residues fall out of solution. So I bring this up to point out this is really an issue that occurs when we're mixing, and the best way to overcome it, we can switch to a different salt of glyphosate, but if you're using that potassium salt, allow plenty of time in between products so that the products can fully mix into solution, and we can successfully mix that way as well. Okay, quickly just finishing with a plug. If you're into podcasts, I've gone down this adventure with my colleagues at K-State and Missouri. We've started a podcast now called The War Against Weeds. Every Wednesday, we'll be dropping new episodes throughout 2021. It's available on Spotify, Libsyn, Google Podcasts, and it will be available on iTunes starting this week as well. So deeper dives into all things weed science, hopefully get plenty of people to listen in, and we think it's going to be a pretty fun adventure. With that, I'm going to finish with the contact slide here. Again, here's that QR code again for if you want the electronic version of the weed guide, so some more time to have that on screen. There's my email, office number, and then Twitter account if you're on Twitter and want to follow me there. And hopefully I left some time here for questions. I guess, Angie, do we handle questions just by, want me to read them or someone read them out loud to me if we have any?
Erica Olson will be reading questions for you.
Okay.
And yeah, Joe, it's whatever you prefer, but there were a couple that came in through the chat, so I'm not sure if you were able to see those. The first one was, have you personally tested any of the newly acquired adjuvants Are any more effective than others?
Yes, so personally, I have not tested any of these adjuvants. Now that we know what they are, I'll be asking companies for some product to test them. But at this point, I can say with the volatility reduction agents currently on the XtendiMax website, it appears to be they're all basically the exact same product, just licensed out to the different companies. So it's all a different trade name powered by Vapor Grip Extra technology. So it's probably all the same thing, but then what BASF will have is a product called Centris, which is a little bit different. So should be hopefully testing that in the upcoming months before spray season, but to date, no, I have not tested these.
Okay, thank you. And the next one is, you showed the improvement with adjuvants in the Xtend system for volunteer corn. What about in the Enlist system, since we can mix in AMS?
That is a good question that I don't have the answer to this point. I can certainly ask Kirk Hout what he used adjuvant-wise in those programs. And whoever that is, if you want to shoot me an email on there and I can follow up that way, that's probably the best way, since I don't have that answer at this time. Great question, though.
Okay, great. And as a reminder, Joe does have his email address up there. I think we can get through a few more of these. How is control with Liberty and Enlist on kochia?
Yeah, so Liberty and Enlist on kochia. So we've had a trial across 3 sites across the state the last couple of years. So kochia data, Mike Osley at Carrington and Brian Jenks out of Minot have some good kochia data. What they have found is it's basically Liberty driving that system. And so as long as you catch kochia when it's small enough, you get good coverage with Liberty. They found good results. Maybe a little bit of a bump with that tank mix with Enlist 1, but not as much as what we're seeing with other weeds like water hemp and common ragweed. And part of that is attributed to the fact that kochia is more tolerant to 2,4-D to begin with. So what they basically found is that tank mix Liberty is really driving it. And we're not seeing quite the synergistic response on kochia than weeds like water hemp, horseweed, or common ragweed.
All right. On the herbicide comparisons, what does FB stand for?
Good question. I should have pointed that out. FB simply meant followed by. So when you had those comparisons and it said FB, that would be that tank mix applied and then followed by the tank mix that was listed below it. So in all those cases, it was followed by the tank mix on the bottom 2 weeks after the first application.
All right. Is there any antagonism with glyphosate, glufosinate tank mixes?
Another good question. So glyphosate and glufosinate tank mixes, there can be some antagonism. Where it has been documented, it's mainly on grass control. So basically glufosinate is burning off some of the leaf tissue before glyphosate is able to go fully systemic within those plants. What we found in testing on peers, we haven't been able to replicate that a whole lot. But of course, once we started applying it on more acres commercially, it's grasses where I would really anticipate seeing that antagonism show up first.
All right. Let's see. Regarding antagonism with 2,4-D and dicamba with glyphosate, is it just in post-emerge soybean applications, or is this noticed in burn downs as well? For example, post-harvest small grain or pre-plant burn down?
Yep, another great question there. And so the antagonism of the glyphosate in the either dicamba or 2,4-D, it is noticed on grasses in basically any application. So there's a lot more work being conducted in the southern U.S. and then also over in Australia. But it's antagonism that can be noticed in any application, primarily on grasses. And there's a couple things going on there. One is there's some data showing that that the tank mix can actually decrease the absorption of glyphosate into the plant. And then also dicamba can kind of slow the growth of these plants enough that and inhibit translocation of glyphosate compared to applying the products sequentially, even by a day or three. If you apply one followed by the other 1 to 3 days later, it's not as antagonistic or not seeing the same issues as the tank mix together.
All right, thank you, Joe. I think we still have time for just a couple more questions. Is neutralizing the pH level of water before mixing in herbicides beneficial?
Yes, neutralizing the pH of water, and that's of course going to depend on which products we're looking at. If we're focused on what we can use in these systems, the one thing to remember is once you add glyphosate into a tank, it greatly acidifies the water. And research across a number of different water sources has shown that basically once you add glyphosate, it drops the pH down to below 5. And I know with some of these pH modifying buffers that and agents such adjuvants such like that, it's really, those are really made to raise the pH back, at least back above 5, to help prevent further volatility of dicamba in those systems. So, you know, we want higher pHs with some products such as our ALS chemistry or group 2 herbicides. But for these type of applications, if we're adding glyphosate, it's going to acidify the system and it's very difficult to raise that pH back up. There are some products that can get us back to neutral. And what we can see happen there is that glyphosate can be a little bit more sensitive to changes in pH. Once we get to those higher pHs, we have seen some lower control levels of tougher weeds for glyphosate, such as barnyard grass. So there's a reason why glyphosate lowers the spray solution pH. A lot of them are formulated that way. And raising the pH back up again does not affect so much the efficacy of dicamba or 2,4-D, but does affect glyphosate, or can affect glyphosate in many situations.
All right, and we are getting close to the next presenter's time, but one last quick question. And then, yeah, for anyone else that may still have some follow-up questions, and I think there are a couple in the Q&A, Joe will answer those in a written format. But what rate of Liberty was used in the Liberty, FB Liberty app?
Yep, good question. And so I forgot to mention this as well. And with the Enlist pictures that I showed, the rate was a quart of Roundup Paramax, a quart of Liberty, and then a quart of Enlist 1. So a quart of each of those products, and all those pictures showed for the Enlist pictures.